Good evening, everybody. My name is Robbie Luckett. I'm director of the Margaret Walker Center and professor of history at Jackson State University. The Margaret Walker Center is a Black Studies research center, archive, and museum on the campus of Jackson State University. We were founded by the great writer Margaret Walker in 1968 and continued her work in her honor as a museum, archive, and research center. It's our great pleasure for Black History Month to bring tonight together two original freedom riders from 1961. And we will be sharing here momentarily with you the documentary about the life and efforts and philosophy of one of those freedom riders, Rabbi Phil Posner, who will be joined in conversation with Mr. Hezekiah Watkins. Rabbi Posner, welcome. We're so glad to have you here tonight. And Hezekiah Watkins, thank you for joining us as well. Both of these gentlemen were one of 329 freedom riders arrested in Jackson in the summer of 1961. And we'll look forward to hearing more from them later and to learning about their experiences. But we're going to begin with Rabbi Posner's documentary. And so without further ado, we'll get started.
Hi, I'm Philip Posner, a retired rabbi and an author of a book about ethical virtues like compassion, moral courage, and empathy, the ability to feel what another person is feeling. I'm 83, and my wonderful wife, Louise, and I live here in Mexico. In 1961, I was arrested in Mississippi for being a freedom rider and sent to a penitentiary. And I am about to tell you what that was like and why we were called freedom riders. But before I do that, I want to ask you, do you ever wonder if you are important, whether you have the power to influence society? In other words, do you think you could make a difference in the struggle against things like injustice? When I was a teenager, I questioned my importance, and then I discovered what was then called the Civil Rights Movement, which ultimately led to my being imprisoned. In fact, what you are looking at now is my prison cell at Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi, where I did time following my arrest in June of 1961. I'm telling you my story so that you can feel what it is like to be in prison with me, using your empathy, the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. With empathy and imagination, you will know what it feels like to be locked up with we freedom riders. We were called freedom riders because we rode buses and sat black and white together in segregated buses and in transportation facilities, where in southern states like Mississippi, it was illegal for blacks and whites to live together, forbidden to even sit next to each other. Did you know that? Over 300 of us, mostly students, were arrested. Here, I am looking at photos of some of my fellow freedom riders. But you know, I don't want my story to be only about us. So at the end, I'm also going to tell you about three incredible teenagers who believed they could make a difference and have, big time. Have you ever heard of a man named John Lewis who died on July 20th, 2020? Here he is being honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was a congressman for 33 years, and President Obama called him the soul of the Congress. He was an amazing social activist, arrested 45 times for what he called good trouble. In 1965, he was severely beaten up by a Selma, Alabama sheriff on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is named after a Confederate general and leader of a racist organization called the Ku Klux Klan. As an iron bar was coming down on his head, he moved his head slightly, enough that he was badly injured, but thank God not killed. John was also a freedom rider. We were arrested the same day. So consider this an invitation to join me and myself for 39 days and try to feel what it was like for us. However, before you decide whether to join me or not, you obviously need to know what you are getting into. The first 13 freedom riders who boarded a Greyhound bus left Washington, D.C., May the 14th of 1961 on their way to New Orleans. Near Anniston, Alabama, they were assaulted by a car caravan of violent segregationists and barely survived. One of the reasons they did was because of the kindness and bravery of this 12-year-old girl, Jamie McKinney, who, when she saw what was happening in front of her very home, rushed out to aid them as best as she could. Later the same day, Mother's Day, a Trailways bus arrived at the Birmingham station with a group of racist hoodlums. There they assaulted the Black and white freedom riders. James Peck and Charles Person were beaten with fists and a lead pipe. Peck's injury required 53 stitches in his head. I was far more fortunate. Our trip by train from New Orleans to Jackson was uneventful. In fact, we were accompanied by FBI agents, although I truly don't know if they were there to spy on us at the direction of their boss, J. Edgar Hoover, or to protect us. I merely experienced being fingerprinted, ordered to undress, body searched, photographed, and then endured imprisonment. First in a large dormitory, and then in the maximum security unit, a compact brick building that appears to rise out of the ground. It comprised 4 cell blocks with 13 cells per block, 2 prisoners to a cell. It was surrounded by a 20-foot high fence topped with barbed wire and 4 concrete posts which could be mounted with machine guns. So new, my young friends, or older friends, are you ready to join me in the cell? Each has a wash basin, a toilet, and a double steel bunk bed with mattresses. Of course, we Black and white men are segregated from each other. Every door to the cell block can only be opened by a guard from the outside with a key to an electric control box. The women are in a separate cell block 30 feet from the electric chair. Can you picture them being that close to a place of death? Look at this, the size of my 6-foot by 9-foot cell. Can you imagine living in a place like that for 39 days? So in addition to feeling trapped in such a tiny space, you may also feel lonely, as I occasionally did. Or you may feel a little afraid, particularly when the guards threaten to hose us down with fire hoses because we won't stop singing our Freedom Rider songs. During the day, we can talk to our cellmates, but especially at night, be prepared to hear the occasional scream of one of our inmates having a nightmare, or the rustle of a guard's key as he patrols the corridor in front of our cells. Like me, you may have a hard time falling asleep. Mississippi in June is especially humid and hot, so sleeping comes with our bodies in sweat, and our mattresses have a rotten smell. But most of all, when we cannot sleep, it's because even though we can see, hear, and feel prison life all around us, it's still so difficult to believe that we are here in a state penitentiary, sentenced to 4 months and $2,000 or 6 months for merely sitting with our black and white friends on a bench in the Jackson train terminal, where no one today would bat an eye to see a little black girl sitting. Then, just as we feel like we are about to fall asleep, memory intervenes, and we hear again the reverberating tap of our shoes, echoing our act of conscience as we stride towards the door to the terminal's segregated waiting room. We remember the whispers, a few attempts to break the tension, and the alternating rhythm of our heartbeat with our mind's measure. Stay cool, the sweating palms. Move quicker, there's the door to the waiting room. Trying to sleep, eyes shut, we still see our women colleagues moving in a different direction and hear us men singing, black and white together. Bob and Helen Singleton are the UCLA coordinators of the rides. And with your imagination and empathy, I bet as you see Bob watching his wife, Helen, disappear, you can feel his overwhelming anxiety, his wanting to scream out, honey, be well, I love you. Outside the waiting room, the police in stony silence stand like a wall while the FBI agents melt away in the afternoon heat. We had not expected them to be present. In 1961, black churches in Alabama had not yet been burned. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney had not yet been murdered.
For underneath her borders, the devil draws no line. If you drag her muddy rivers, nameless bodies you will find. Oh, the fat trees of the forest have hid a
For their
thousand
daring to
crimes.
register blacks to vote in the Delta of Mississippi. Then, despite the snores of someone from another cell, with memory's recollection, we hear again the raucous voice of Captain Ray bellowing, "Are y'all going to move? Are y'all going to move on?" He says it 3 times, but we remain seated. Black and white together. Nobody moves. We sing, just like a tree that's planted in the water, we shall not be moved. Okay, line up, he shouts, line up. We proudly get into the paddy wagons. Then the words, we shall overcome someday, ring out in unison through barred windows as we see strange towns fly by. Singing provides a sense of solidarity in the face of what seems incomprehensible. Our Freedom Rider friends are a fascinating, brilliant collection of individuals, varied in outlook and background, including our religious identity. Based on a poll we actually conducted, 17 of us were Protestants, 16 were Jews, 8 were Catholics, 3 were Quakers, 4 were atheists, and naturally there were a few who declined to state. Nor were we all students. Some were married with children. When we wake up, it's about 5 in the morning, and already some of our cellmates are starting to talk. Their voices reverberate up and down the cell block corridor. Our discussions range from how to organize a union to a lecture on a fish named Kandiru, or the real lowdown on the boxing game by one of us who was a New Yorker and who had fought in the Golden Glove contests. During one discussion, someone shared, "My mother had a kind of emotional breakdown when she learned that I had signed on to joining the Freedom Rides." His saying that caused us to talk about our parents. I told them how lucky I was that my mother and father's strong Jewish ethics and empathy for how African Americans were treated in the South caused them, the Yiddish is to sheb nachas, to feel a kind of parental pride for my social activism. "Philip," my mother said, I'm scared for what might happen to you, but I admire what you are doing. What I chose to do was very much connected to my Jewish heritage, shaped by our history. My parents loved to travel, but once when they were planning a trip to Europe, I can still hear my mother's declaration. Izzy, she called my father, I can't go to Germany. With everyone I would meet, I would wonder, was he or she a Nazi? Did he or she support Hitler's extermination of fellow Jews? Did that individual extract gold from the dead bodies of those who were shot after they were forced to dig their own graves? And you, my friends, can you imagine being forced to drink water out of a fountain designated colored only or white only? Go to a restaurant or a bathroom that says whites or blacks only? Can you imagine having attended a concert of great Black entertainers like Marian Anderson, Nat King Cole, Sammy Davis Jr., who were paid thousands to perform? Yes, I know for some of you they were way before your time, but believe me, they were loved by masses of people. Yet when they were performing in the South, they had to find a motel or hotel reserved for Blacks for one reason only, their race. How about this? Imagine you are an African-American soldier having fought during World War II against Hitler's racism, having seen some of your own Black buddies seriously injured or killed. Then when you come home to your town in Alabama, you see German white POWs traveling without any form of discrimination other than the fact that they are prisoners of war, while you must sit at the back of a segregated bus treated as a second-class citizen. Yes, those are some of the reasons I joined the Freedom Rides, because I could not ignore the bigotry in my own country, nor disregard the impact my Jewish heritage had on my feelings about racism. I believe that when our personal history, ethical values, and memory ring true with empathy for the suffering of others, like a towering bell that won't be silenced, we are moved to acts of compassion, righteousness, and moral courage that occasionally even surprise us ourselves. In 1961, there was a real fear of nuclear war, which a year later led to a 13-day showdown that brought America and Russia, then called the USSR, to the brink of nuclear destruction. So we all felt a need to keep up with the news. How, you might ask? One of our colleagues from the Bronx created a little bag which he tied under his testicles, in which he had placed the material to make a crystal radio, which the guards had not found when he had been body searched. In the pen, he put the parts together to make a radio. He listened to the news and shared it with the rest of us. Our backgrounds were diverse. I was the product of a liberal upbringing in white suburbia with only a minimum of social contact with Negroes, as they were called then. Nor had I read any of M.L. King's philosophy of nonviolence, nor had I even heard of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, which co-sponsored the rides with the National Association of Colored People, the NAACP, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. What we shared was our mutual conviction that racism and segregation in America, as seen especially in the Jim Crow South, was immoral and unjust. Agreeing to join the Freedom Rides meant that we also agreed to accept the movement's commitment to an ethic of nonviolent resistance to possible aggression or violent behavior that might be inflicted upon us. In fact, we had to attend seminars on passive resistance, one of which involved being taken to a bar near the University of Southern California, where we were physically harassed in an effort to intimidate us to see if we would exercise the appropriate passive resistance. I was 21 and a rabbinic student. 2 or 3 black strangers approached me at the bar. "Hey man, dig this whitey." They pressed up against my body. "Look at these dirty white hands." They held up my fingers for all to see as if they were explosive missiles about to ignite the darkness that surrounded us. So, my friends, if you join this social justice movement, you must be prepared to survive what may come your way with moral courage, peacefully, nonviolently, what Mahatma Gandhi called ahimsa, which means responding to your enemy's behavior with love. It was that ethic that inspired the beliefs and actions of M.L. King, who supported but did not participate in the riots. In fact, he had advised us, quote, "You must keep your resistance on the highest level of dignity and discipline. Freedom riders must develop the quiet courage of dying for a cause," close quote. Looking back on it now, I was probably better off not having heard the second part of King's advice. In prison, that ideology and training helped us deal with the harassment we endured, which included the guards shaking every cell door at 4:30 in the morning and denying us anything to read except the King James Bible and the White Man's Viewpoint, a segregationist tract by Carlton Putnam, the then head of Delta Airlines. We were only let out of our cells to take a shower twice a week, nor were we allowed any privileges such as purchase of items or food from the prison store. More importantly, we could only write and receive 1 letter a week, which was censored, and no packages or visitors except for that of a Catholic priest and Rabbi Perry Nussbaum from Jackson, who, against the wishes of his congregants and fellow clergy, courageously made a weekly round trip of 260 miles to visit any freedom rider who had requested a visit. For Perry's indomitable commitment to social justice and equal rights, he paid a heavy price. First, his synagogue, Temple Beth Israel of Jackson, was bombed, and then his home. There was no styrofoam tray. The food was pushed through the space in our cell door on a metal tray. We were given 5 minutes to gulp it down. The everyday white potatoes, beans, fatback pork, and white pasty bread, which some of our colleagues creatively molded into chess pieces. If you like variety in your food, forget it. The evening meal is simply a rehash of the noon meal, served cold. You will not get any fresh vegetables or fruit. So, like me, when I was released, you too will leave with bloody gums caused by a lack of vitamin C from what is called scurvy. So, do you think you will miss the food that you enjoyed? It was our daily practice before or after we ate to sing. On one occasion, rather than obey an arbitrary order to stop singing, we let loose with a chorus of freedom rider songs. As punishment, our mattresses, sheets, etc. were taken away for 3 days, and the blowers turned on all night, making it difficult to sleep on the cold metal bunks without any covering. So I'm wondering now, my viewers, will you comply or to stop singing, or will you continue to sing with the rest of us? Your decision is an important one because giving up our mattresses deprived us of one of our few physical comforts. But like singing, it also gave us a sense of collective purpose, discipline, and resolve, spiritual ingredients that contribute to our survival in a hostile environment. At midnight on July 22nd, that hostile environment almost turned deadly for our colleagues. After protesting their all too often humiliating treatment that included being called and boy, they began singing. For that, 47 of them were forced into 2 6-by-6-foot solitary cells and left there until they began to suffocate. As cruel as the guards could be, occasionally we got to see them as fellow human beings. I still remember vividly standing in my cell, listening to one of them explain his feelings about which for him included the affection he felt for the black servant, Mammy, who largely raised him. It was a surprising emotional experience for those of us who chose to listen to him. Your emotional survival will be enhanced, as was ours, by sharing our feelings about what we most longed for when we were in prison. As we did, the corridor rang out with descriptions of the people and things we missed on the outside. For me, it was a hamburger with fries and a chocolate malt, the freedom to go to a movie of my choice, and a sweetheart's kiss. One of the surprising things about life at Parchman was that the trustees, the upper echelon level of inmates, could have once-a-month visits with their spouses, including private time for sex. As for us, the rumor was that the prison authorities dealt with our sexual appetites by putting something called saltpeter into our food. One's all-consuming fear was that someone would screw up and our bail would not be posted. And until that happened, it was like waiting to be told, you don't have some terrible disease. When one of us was due to be released, the cell block would become abnormally quiet as hope, fear, and empathy coalesced on the turn of a key whose power for freedom was not ours. I was lucky. I only had to wait one day after the time that Cora's attorney posted my bail. And until recently, I gratefully kept his card in my wallet. But there were those who were held in prison as long as 5 days after they were due to be released. Well, particularly, my young friends, have I convinced you that you are incredibly important, special, unique, and each of you in your own way can do great things? And that if you look around where you live, see what's happening in our country, the world as it is, you will understand that you too have a purpose with all of us to help build a world with more compassion, empathy, peace, and justice. Speaking of justice, have you finally decided whether you would become a freedom rider? Your decision would have to be made based on what was happening in the 1960s, when seeing thousands of blacks and whites in cities throughout America carrying signs that proclaimed Black Lives Matter would have been a mirage, a joke. For segregationists, a nightmare. 2 months before I got to inhale the breath of freedom, Newsweek magazine reported that a Gallup poll, May of 1961, showed that a majority of Americans, 61%, quote, disapprove of what the Freedom Riders are doing, close quote. And a poll of June 27 showed that, quote, 57% believe that such tactics as sit-ins and freedom rides hurt rather than help the Negroes' chances for integration in the South, close quote. It has been over half a century since those Gallup polls reflected attitudes about racism, change, and social justice. And at our Freedom Rider 50th reunion in May of 2011, I saw and felt the hugs of love and appreciation from both blacks and whites in Jackson, Mississippi. Things have changed, as exemplified by Governor Barber's breakfast for us, where he actually apologized for our arrests. And there were 23 black senators in the state legislature at that time, and a black warden at Parchman, where we were served, instead of fatback and slimy okra, the best barbecue I have ever tasted. If you decided to join We Freedom Riders, I hope it was because of your empathy for how it was when we were not so welcomed, to say the least, by the white community. And if you were able to feel what we endured, you have learned what it was like to be part of one of the most important events in the continuing civil rights struggle for equal justice in America. On May of 2011, Oprah Winfrey kindly brought us Freedom Riders to Chicago to be on her TV show. Occasionally, I have been asked, did she give you anything? Yes, she gave us a well-written book by Raymond Arsenault, The Freedom Riders. At the end of his book, he writes, in the process of delivering the movement's message of nonviolence, the Freedom Riders became experiential learners, acquiring truths about themselves and the human condition. Wherever they found themselves, on buses and terminal waiting rooms and mass meetings in the jails and prisons of the benighted South, they absorbed the concrete lessons of struggle. Some were hard and sobering lessons about the intractability of racial hatred and entrenched privilege. But others were hopeful and inspiring, demonstrating the expansive possibilities of individual and collective action, close quote. The historian is correct, but for me, the lessons learned also have to do with patiently enduring the struggle and to not give up hope that everyone can make a difference. As taught by my 2,000-year-old social action mentor, Rabbi Tarfon, Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. Now, 59 years older, I am not only grateful to have survived, but to live at a time when so many in America and throughout the world actively oppose racism, hatred, and bigotry. Martin Luther King once wrote, quote, the ultimate aim of our struggle is to create better relations with our opponent rather than defeat and humiliate him, close quote. Now at 83, I know that to survive defeat, humiliation, and suffering is often just a matter of sheer good luck. It also requires patience and faith, and especially the attribute of moral courage, as seen with these teenagers. Amika George, at 17, was so appalled that many girls were too poor to have sanitary products during their period. She founded an organization that 2 years ago moved the English government to fund free sanitary products for all girls in English schools and colleges. And I bet you have heard of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish environmental activist who, when she was 15, became famous throughout the world because of the speech she gave at the 2018 United Nations Climate Summit, when she demanded that world leaders take immediate action on the climate. Lastly, one of the most incredible teens of all times is Anne Frank, who I'm sure you have heard of. When she was 16, just before she was taken away to die at Auschwitz, the Nazi extermination camp, she wrote in the front cover of her diary these simple words: be kind and have courage. What more can be said about the moral courage that everyone is capable of making a difference, as with each of you in your own way? My friends, young and old, thank you for accompanying me as I shared this life altering experience with you. Now, may the appetizer for justice you have tasted with your empathy sustain you for your own future full course of social justice and activism for a better America and world. And if you are a teacher or a student, and I am honored to be invited to visit your classroom via Zoom, I look forward to answering your questions and hearing your thoughts and decision as to whether you would have joined me in my prison cell. Now, will you join me in singing? What side are you on, boy? What side are you on? They tell me here in Jackson there are no neutrals yet. You're either a freedom rider or a Tom for Governor Ross Barnett. My father was a freedom fighter, and a fighter's son is I. And I'm gonna keep on fighting here until the day I die. Molto bene.
Now my pleasure to welcome Rabbi Phil Posner and Hezekiah Watkins, freedom riders from 1961, into this conversation. Rabbi Posner, your documentary has generated a whole lot of questions online. I had planned on offering you a few, but it looks like we have quite a few young people who are asking questions. And I want to start with one for you that is came through on Facebook. And then I want to turn to Hezekiah for a minute and let him tell us a little bit about his story and what led him to become a freedom rider. But the first question, Rabbi Posner, is what made you want to tell people your story?
Well, as I said, I'm a big believer in empathy. And I believe that when people listen to a story about moral courage and other aspects of social justice, they may be inclined themselves to become involved. And so, and as I said, I think in the movie too, I was terribly influenced. Miss Congressman Lewis gave us so much to the United States. And so when I knew his story, I wanted to make sure that I had the honor of telling my story in part, Zichrono Livracha Leolam, in memory of him. And we say in Hebrew for the blessings that he did for our society. So Lewis definitely influenced me as well.
And as he did so many people. Well, Hezekiah, I want to bring you into this conversation because you were one of the 329 people arrested in the summer of 1961. And I know this one is a bit of a loaded question, but I do want you to share your experience and how you came to be a freedom rider and an activist. But Kia wants to know, what were you feeling in the moment? So maybe you can talk about what led you to the freedom rides and what it was like and what you were feeling.
Well, my first arrest, I was sent to Parchman Prison, which, like Rabbi Posey stated, it wasn't a nice place to be. I was 13 years of age,
Wow.
Didn't know anything about the Freedom Riders, didn't know anything about racism, bigotry, none of those. It was in prison and then thereafter prison that I wanted to get involved. I wanted to make a difference after I met James Bevel, a young man that was here in Jackson, Mississippi, who was heading up the CORE organization and trying to get other young men to come and join forces with him. And I can recall meeting him. I can recall him begging me to come on board, but I didn't want any parts of it because my mom had beat the hell out of me after going to prison. It was by mistake. And based on that, I didn't want any parts of it. But Mr. Bevel showed me some things in Jackson that I was unaware of. And those was the thing that you mentioned, Rabbi, in terms of the separate waiting areas, separate eating area, where you had to sit on the bus. All of those things I thought was a way of life. I thought it was the way it was supposed to be for blacks, because my mother, my teachers, not even my pastor of my church had told me anything different.
Wow.
And, you know, based on that, I got involved and I wanted to make a difference. But not only did I want to make a difference, I wanted to see that difference. And I lived long enough, just like you, to see the work that we put in actually did some good. And I'm very proud of that. Okay.
There's a question here that I think would be of interest to both of you. How did it make you feel when you got arrested?
How did it make you feel when you got arrested?
Well, the first arrest, my friend and I, we was just joking around near the Greyhound bus station, and he actually pushed me inside of the bus station. And I was taken from the bus station to Parchman Prison. Now, I was scared, nervous, just out of my mind, because I didn't know where I was going. I had never heard of Parchman Prison. I had never heard of death row. And here I am in Parchman Prison with other inmates that was not freedom riders. And it was awful. I was scared every day until I got out. And like I stated earlier, that's when I met James Bevel, and he really showed me some things that I knew that wasn't right.
Well, thanks. If the question is, how did I feel when I got arrested? I think the feelings were intimidated. You know, I felt intimidated. I felt harassed. But I also felt proud that somehow I found the courage with a bunch of other incredible people to get arrested. And I think the sense of pride also comes because I knew it was the right thing to do. And as I mentioned, I'm grateful to my mom and dad for the support they gave me to help me know that it was the right thing to do. So I felt intimidated. I felt a little bit frightened, but not too much. But I also felt proud.
A related question for you, Rabbi Posner. As a white person with a different religion, were you treated equally to other whites, or were you treated like African Americans in Mississippi?
That's a really good question. Because I was white, I was basically treated as a white person. And so I didn't, as I point out in the documentary, we whites did not suffer the way Hezekiah and his colleagues suffered as Black freedom riders. So I'll tell you a funny story. Helen Singleton, who you saw, is African American, and when she heard that Rabbi Perry Nussbaum was going to come to visit us, and he visited every freedom rider, whether they were Black or white or women, men, And so when Helen heard about it, she said, I want to meet with Nussbaum, because as Hezekiah say, anything you can do to get out of the cell is something you want to do. So Helen got out, and the prison matron said to her, "Girl, you ain't no Jew. Get back in that cell." And the way she tells that story is pretty cute.
And Rabbi Nussbaum wrote letters to your parents, didn't he?
I showed him to you on the documentary. Absolutely. He was incredible. In Yiddish, we say he was a mensch. That means he was a beautiful person.
And I'm guessing that meant a lot to your parents.
It meant a lot to my mother and dad. In fact, I think I mentioned that in the documentary, that my mother said, Rabbi Nussbaum, I'm quoting her, as much as I'm proud of my son for what he did, you live it every day. You're there, and so you really are the courageous ones to do that. And I think Hezekiah, when we were at the convention, at the reunion, and Black folk were coming up to us and thanking us and all that stuff, and I'd look at them, particularly young people, and say, "Hey, you can thank me, but you ought to thank your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents, because they lived through it." And so, that's really an important aspect for African Americans to always be conscious of and never forget what their families had to go through, the lynchings and the violence and the outrageous behavior of America towards fellow human beings. Just beyond comprehension. Every time I look at those lynchings, I just get so disgusted. And I can imagine, Hezekiah, how you feel if I feel that way.
There are several questions here that are related, and a lot of it has to do with kind of more modern issues and how you feel today, and how everything that happened to you then makes you feel today. And then another question of, are you still haunted by this experience that you had? So semi-related, how is what you went through, how does that impact you today? And are you in some ways haunted by what happened to you?
Well, I will answer that one the best I can. I am hunted almost nightly with my experience in Parchman Prison.
Wow.
I'm seeing a doctor, of course. It's something that, it's some things that happen to me in Parchman that I don't know whether or not it happened to any of the other Freedom Riders or not. But I was not put in with the Freedom Riders. I was located in a cell with a convict.
With the general population.
I'm sorry?
With the general population.
Exactly.
Right.
And just some things happen that I don't talk about. And that's one of the reasons it is still hunting me. Those scars are still there. Although on the 24th of last month, I was invited back to Parchman Prison. Reluctantly, I went. And I'm glad I did go, because it started a healing process. Nothing was healed completely, but I felt better by going, because I knew I was going to be able to leave as opposed to being locked up. But I can say I felt better. But the scars are still there, and they'll be there until the day I die.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Hezekiah, we white guys were so lucky in that way. Although the Freedom Riders, I think its name is James, I forget, who were arrested in Houston, they were thrown in the general population and they suffered too, but not like you. So yeah, you were really unlucky in that way that you were thrown in with the general population, whereas your fellow African American colleagues, most of them were segregated in the non-general population. So Hezekiah, you make me feel so unhaunted. I don't, I don't. To answer that question, I don't feel haunted at all. I feel, and as I mentioned in the film, the FBI agents were there. And as I say, I don't know for sure if they would have protected us, but I think most of us who weren't thrown in the general population felt lucky that they were there versus the Jackson police, et cetera. So I never, what an interesting word, haunted. I've never felt haunted about the experience.
There are several really interesting questions here I want to pose to you guys and get your thoughts on. This one in particular, did some guards at Parchman disagree with what was going on, but were forced to do certain things, or did they all agree, and were they all, there defending segregation and just seemingly on the wrong side?
Hezekiah, you want to give your viewpoint?
Yeah, I think the guards was, wow, they wasn't forced to do anything. As a matter of fact, I can recall hollering out to the guards for help, and they never did show up. And when I was up there last month, I asked the superintendent about that, and he stated that those guys really was not trained guards. It was just Joe Blow out of the field who was looking for extra money. And but like I stated, they never did come to my rescue.
Yeah. Look, I never interviewed them to ask them how they felt about, but I had the distinct feeling that they viewed us as agitators that shouldn't have been there, and I don't think that any of them felt any sense of injustice about the process that they were involved in as part of a social political system. So I doubt very much. Now, as I said, that doesn't mean that some of them weren't human beings, and I do talk about the fact that occasionally we got to see some humanity, just the fact that they were fellow human beings. But in terms of any sense of outrage at the Jim Crow Southern racism, no, they were part of that process themselves.
Well, and another question semi-related to that, how does that experience of experiencing segregation affect your point of view on life today? Your experiences there as freedom riders fighting segregation and experiencing the realities of what segregation was, how does that affect your point of view today?
Everybody?
You want to go?
You can go.
Well, I try to address that in the documentary by saying how incredulous, absolutely amazed I was at the Black Lives Matter movement. I think the effect on me is an awareness that racism, bigotry still exists, and people have to stand up to it. As many of you know, the anti-Semitism in the world and in the United States is the highest it's been in years and years and years, as is bigotry and racism in general. Being in the civil rights movement definitely affected my sense of the outrage of racism and bigotry today as we see it. So I'm a proud progressive to this day. That doesn't mean I do enough to what I should be doing, but I'm proud to feel that the effect of what happened to me means that I have to continue to show empathy for others who suffer so terribly. And some of the things, as we all know, are just incomprehensible. What's going on with Ukrainians? I mean, the suffering is just beyond. Or what happens, in Turkey? Some of this, as I say at the end of my documentary, it just has to do with fate. Some of us are lucky, and some of us, sad to say, are in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Robbie, Hezekiah, me, we're lucky. Our great grandparents got out of Africa, or Robbie, your great grandparents got out of Europe and didn't end up in some terrible situation. I'm certainly grateful that my grandparents got out of Poland and Russia, because otherwise I'd be smoked a long time ago.
I think that the work that we put in the 60s died. It just simply died, yes. And some of it was buried based on what is happening now. Racism has always been here, but it's at a high level. The level is much higher, in my opinion, than it has been when I was 13 years of age, being a freedom rider. Some of the things that Blacks are going through, we did not go through as freedom. We was beaten, we was shot at, we was murdered, but not at the alarming rate that we are having today. So it seems as though with this new generation, something is missing. I don't know what it is, but something is missing. There's too much hatred going on. And like you stated, racism will always exist. But now it's coming from all four corners. It's closing in on you. So what's your next step? I would say the next step would be true leadership. It's what we are missing. We're not getting leadership from our politicians. We're not getting leadership from our pastors or anyone else. No one seems to care. They're just living their life and going on about their business. I realize there will never be another Dr. King, John Lewis, because I don't think those guys was actually born. I just believe they were just brought here some kind of way from some spaceship, and they started doing the work. But there's not a person that you can name that can stand up to those two, or even James Bevel. I mean, there was others, but these folks are all gone. So who gonna step up to the plate? That's what I'm waiting on, because I got to pass my torch onto someone else. But who do you pass it to? There's no one that I can pass my torch to. We're running.
I'm so glad that you shared this. To answer, I personally think that it is in a way worse today, because I think there's more segregation. If you look at schools throughout the United States now, Blacks and whites are not going to school together. And it's not just because of racism, it's socio-economic. So economically, you have a division. And I'm a big believer. I'm hoping that President Clinton, a long time ago, advocated, Robbie, that neighbors get together and talk and meet each other. And I believe that maybe under a Democratic administration a couple of years from now, there's going to be an effort for young people, black and whites, young people to be part of kind of an American Peace Corps where they get to know each other because they don't know each other now. And the same thing with an opportunity for neighbors. I'll stop preaching, but yeah, I personally think there's more segregation now in a way than there was. Thanks.
Well, and I would say, don't give up, Hezekiah. There are a lot of young people watching this right now who I think are prepared who want to take up the torch. And I know that I see them at Jackson State. So we do have some hope in our younger generations.
I think there's a lot of great, personally, I think there's a lot of great leaders out there too. Yeah. I mean, I'm prejudiced. I think President Biden, God bless him, is doing as much as he can to help affect real change. And I think there's a lot of wonderful people out there. But I'm so sorry to hear you say that you don't see it in your clergy, because I see it in my rabbinic clergy, man. I see a lot of great rabbis out there doing a lot of important stuff. So anyway.
Okay, well, we've got a lot more questions. We're not going to be able to get to everything. We've already been going for a little bit over an hour, but there's a couple of more that I do want to try and get to you guys from the folks who are watching. And this one, I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you did. What did you think took the most bravery out of all the things you've experienced?
What did you think took the most bravery?
I think after my first beating by the police officer, after that happened, it just made me want to go further. After the beating, a hole was knocked in my head. The FBI came out, talked to me, took pictures of my head, and said, well, you need to stop. You're too young. You need to go home. And I think those words probably fueled me, that whereas I wanted to go further. And I did go further, because I ended up being arrested 109 times. So that was no turning back for me.
Thanks. I've never been asked that question before. I think when I think about it, I think part of the most bravery was looking at those guards in the eye and facing them with the reality that they had a hell of a lot of power over us and they could do us real damage. And I think that was one aspect of the bravery. And then just when I think about it, which I was probably pretty naive, the reality of getting shot or killed. That's why, to me, while we freedom riders were important, to me, the real great heroes are Schwerner, Sweeney, and Goodman, those people who are out there doing voter registration all by themselves in those years. To me, they're the real heroes. But anyway, interesting question, person who asked about bravery.
Yeah, and it required bravery and courage to do what you did, and it still does. It's not, I often say it's not fearlessness, because there was plenty to be afraid of, but it's courage in the face of that fear that you guys exhibited.
Well, I don't know about Hezekiah, but I have to say, for me, part of it was just a naivete. I mean, yeah, I was raised in a progressive home where I was taught justice, 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 shalt thou pursue, and other religious values, etc. But part of it was just my naivete that, well, I'm going to do this, and nothing's going to happen to me.
Yeah, and having heard Hezekiah tell his story so many times, and kind of being an unwitting freedom rider and almost accidental at first, but it led to a lifetime of activism. And it led to, how many times were you arrested as an activist, Hezekiah?
109.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that certainly took courage, for sure. So kind of going back to part of the conversation we were just having, I have another question about your advice on dealing with racism and justice, even in today's world. So what would you tell young people to do? What would you tell not just young? What would you tell middle-aged people to do like me? So, what would be your advice?
I think we have to communicate more than what we are doing now. We have to go into the trenches per se. Get to know that person. Get to know what he or she like, what she doesn't like, what he doesn't like. We got to establish friendship somewhere down the line. And by doing that, I think that we could eradicate a lot of the racism that's out there, because people don't know you. They don't know your thinking. They don't know your feeling. But if you just talk to them, and we just don't do that, especially the opposite race. You're just not having those conversations other than football or basketball. And it goes much further than that.
I obviously agree. I've referred to it. Getting to know each other as human beings is just crucial. And that's why I do admire there are churches and synagogues and even some mosques where people do get together. Black churches and white synagogues and white churches, people do get together and eat together. There's not enough of it, but it does happen. And we need obviously need more of that. And we need, in my opinion, we need government to foster opportunities for people to get to know each other.
Exactly.
And a related question, how do you think this kind of ongoing trauma of oppression and white supremacy that we see is affecting younger generations today?
I think it's affecting them in a terrible way because they're so lonely and they don't know who the hell they are. That's why there's so much drugs, because particularly in the United States, we have this population of people who think that success is money. And if they don't have it, they feel powerless and insecure. And also in the United States, in my humble opinion, there's a lack of patria. There's a lack of religious identity that there used to be in the United States. And there's so many young people who don't know who they are. They're lonely. They're in that way, they're almost kind of afraid. And I think that's what's contributing a lot to the tragedy that we see in the United States. Yo vivo en un país de Mexico. I live in a country in Mexico where basically the people here, they know who they are. It's either because of the church or because there's still family and identity, and family helps each other and does things for each other. Those things are, sad to say, lacking in the United States from what I can see. And that's causing part of the trauma that we see in society.
And I agree.
And then lastly, then Trump people, play on that and make it even worse. Hezekiah?
I'm about to say, I've always stated that these young folks are lonely. They're looking for some identity, and it's not there. And I think if they could, some kind of way, or someone could help them identify themselves. Like I said it earlier, someone needs to be able to talk to them, with them, at them. But they need to talk. Communication is a powerful tool. And if we can get to talking, it'll take away some of the gun violence. It'll take away some of the racism. It will take a lot of things away from what is happening now if we could just talk it out.
Well, that's why something that used to exist that doesn't exist in schools anymore is called character education, where people were taught character. And all that stuff, the conservatives have eradicated that kind of stuff. And so because there's a lack of character, as you said, a lack of identity, there's lonely people out there. Look, there's some wonderful exceptions. There's a lot of wonderful young people out there too. But in general, there's You know, listen, I'm a rabbi. I believe that religion, while sometimes it has its faults, religion provides an opportunity for people to identify with values and God and justice and things to help them know who they are with other people. And being part of a political party is important in that way too, because it gives people a sense of identity, and hopefully it's a healthy identity. So yeah, Hezekiah, you touch on it. Identification is crucial for people's welfare. And we see that in the animal world, by the way. The mammals know that. They know the importance of being together.
True that. Yeah.
And the importance of dialogue, as you have both said. There is so much more that we could do and go on and field questions. You really provoked so many wonderful thoughts and ideas. A number of people are thanking you online. Chris, who met Hezekiah back in October, what an incredible and heroic man. We cannot forget stories such as his, or Rabbi Posner. A lot of just words of thanks for everything. For sharing your story. Just grateful for what you've done. And I would be remiss if I didn't also share with you someone that you both know. Thank you both for your courage in sharing, from Jean Luckett, who happens to be my mother.
I should go get my Freedom Rider bag and hold it up, because
there you go.
Your mom gave it to us.
You know, I don't know that we've mentioned this or not, but when you were both here in 2011 in Jackson for the 50th anniversary, Rabbi Posner, we went to the train station, and I took pictures of you there. And I believe that was your first time back there in 50 years.
Yeah, it was.
When we had gone. And I know how emotional it was for you then, and it really is something to still see how both of you feel so emotional about your life's work and what this has meant. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the Margaret Walker Center has in our collections, in our archives, Rabbi Posner's Freedom Rider collection. And we do have people who research at Rabbi Posner and who use those collections, including your journal. We have the letters that Rabbi Nussbaum sent to your parents. We have other correspondence. It's really a beautiful, wonderful collection. If people are interested, I'm putting a link in the comments section to a PDF of the finding aid where you can download it. You can see what's in the collection. We invite researchers to come and to learn more. If you're interested in visiting the Margaret Walker Center or the COFO Civil Rights Education Center, the Council of Federated Organizations state headquarters, which had organized Freedom Summer in 1964, is now a museum that we run as well on campus. And Hezekiah gets to spend a lot of time there. We often introduce him to groups there at the COFO Center. We hope people will reach out to us, use our resources, learn about this history, gain from it, and find ways to insert yourselves into activism and into these causes that you guys so courageously fought for and continue to stand for. Just last thoughts. What would you like to leave these folks with? And I'll see, as you do, I'll share a few more thank yous in the screen. So Hezekiah, what would you like to leave with people tonight?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say everyone that's listening, thank you for joining in tonight. And secondly, I work for the Civil Rights Museum here in Jackson. And if you ever in Mississippi, I would like for you to stop by and see history. The real history is in the Civil Rights Museum here in Jackson. Mississippi history.
Right. I would like to invite students and teachers, if they're listening, maybe Hezekiah feels this way too, but I would be honored to do a Zoom presentation and meet with students and answer the questions, and particularly ask them what would they do. As my movie suggests, would you have gone into my prison cell? And then I want to say to you, Hezekiah, what an honor it was to be with you today. I mean, you really, you were beautiful in terms of things that you said and what you stood for, and it makes me again feel proud that I got to be with people like you to do those kinds of things. And in that way, Senor Luckett, muchas gracias for doing this for us. And I hope there's a lot of other, there's 4 other civil rights museums out there too, Birmingham and et cetera. So hopefully some of them will invite other freedom riders, if we're still around, to participate. But so I thank you both so much for doing this.
Well, Rabbi Posner, you always have a home here in Jackson. You are welcome back here. We would be more than glad to have you come back anytime. And we're grateful for you and for your leadership, and for you, Hezekiah. Thank you for everything. With that, I'm going to close this out. What a wonderful night. What an incredible conversation. You'll be able to continue to find this recording of both the documentary and the conversation on the Margaret Walker Center's Facebook and YouTube pages, where you've been joining us tonight. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Shalom.